So about a week ago, I had a video discussing Rudy Gobert in light of NBA general manager surveys where they did not have Gobert anywhere close to the best centers in the league. And I think that conversation brought up things like how good a player is versus like the team that he's on, and how valuable really is defense, and how good really are you if at a certain point you're going to run into some team that has the one thing that's going to like just kill your weakness over and over again. And so now I want to get to Clint Capela, who I think could also apply to a lot of those same questions, right? Because I think with Capela, number one, I've seen some people bring up the idea that he's actually like one of the 4 or 5 best centers in the NBA, which I would not agree with, but when you see like the reasoning that some of them have on top of the fact that he outplayed a lot of the best centers in the previous postseason, it's like, I can see your rationale at least. But also with Capela, it's like, would he be as valuable for another team as he is with the Houston Rockets, right? Because the Rockets' offensive and defensive game plans, as well as the players around him, fit his style pretty much perfectly, I would say. And I actually want to start with the defensive side of the floor, because I do think Capela's hustle and then his ability to switch is probably, or are probably his best qualities, right? The dude can defend on the perimeter. We've seen him defend point guards, 2 guards, small forwards. If he ever gets switched onto a 4, sure, he can't defend everybody. Sometimes you can muscle him and, he's not like Draymond or shades of past season, mainly down the stretch, Anthony Davis when it comes to just staying in front of guards, but he's definitely pretty good to where he can actually do it. He can defend the pick and roll effectively. I mean, the Rockets were basically switching everything by the time the playoffs started, so yeah, but even when they were not switching on the 5 spot, when they were just switching 1 through 4, he was still defending the pick and roll and defending the rim pretty effectively. And so the reason I bring this up is because you could argue that amongst the better defensive players in the league, outside of like Draymond, if we're sticking to big guys, you could argue that Capela is perhaps the most balanced defensive player. Because we've seen with Rudy Gobert that when he faces the top like 1% of the NBA, he has trouble, right? Al Horford spacing out all the way to the 3-point line, having to step up on Chris Paul mid-range jumpers, getting switched onto James Harden, or just having to defend the Warriors in space. He's had trouble, right? He's an elite rim protector, but when you ask him to step all the way out to the 3-point line sometimes, he becomes just like an average defensive player. The thing with Clint Capela, though, is that that's not really going to happen because he can defend these perimeter players. He can step out to stay on some shooting big guy, whether it's Nikola Jokic or, hell, even someone like Brook Lopez sometimes, So does that actually raise Capela's level to a point that maybe some of us don't even realize, and the people who are saying he's like top 4 are actually the ones who are correct? I mean, it's warranting me talking about it, so it's definitely something I've attempted to wrap my head around. So yeah, it's definitely a doozy. Now, one thing with Capela, if we can go back to the team that he's on, is the Rockets have the personnel necessary to do a switch-everything defense, right? Because Chris Paul, he may only be 6 feet, but he actually does a pretty decent job of defending guys taller than him. James Harden, while his one-on-one defense and help defense are usually a problem, he's a big dude, and he defends the low post actually pretty effectively. If there's one thing James Harden does better than most wings, it's defend the post against like power forwards. And then between Eric Gordon, who's similar to CP, is like a pretty good at defending guys bigger than him. Gordon's also like a lot stronger than I think he looks. And then PJ Tucker and Ba Mute and Ariza are not there anymore, of course, but they still had an impact there for last season. this allows Capela to be able to switch as well, right? Because if the Rockets had a bunch of small dudes who couldn't switch, then you probably wouldn't ask Capela to switch that much, and then that one thing he can do so well would not be as valuable, right? So I think that could potentially knock his value down a little bit. I mean, it comes back to it again. How much of it is Capela is good, and how much of it is the Rockets are the perfect team for him? Now, of course, there's two sides of the floor. We're going to move on to offense. The obvious thing here is he's really good at setting screens, rolling to the basket, finishing, and catching alley-oops. However, I do think he is deserving of a little bit more value than just that, because, number one, whenever Capela sets a screen, he actually sets a screen, which I know doesn't sound like that big of a deal, but once you start watching all these NBA bigs screen consistently, not all of them are setting legitimate, picks, so kudos to that. And then he is better at rolling and finishing than a lot of guys are. So you could just say, well, he just gets it from Harden and CP all day. I mean, he does. And again, that could be a thing that knocks his stock down. But I think he's a better roller than a lot of guys. In fact, the only bigs I can think of off the top of my head who I think are definitely better than Capela at screening and rolling and finishing are probably Anthony Davis, DeAndre Jordan, and maybe like one or two other guys somewhere, okay? You could argue Andre Drummond, for example. I think Towns isn't that far away, but I would guess that Capela... I don't know if Capela is more athletic than Towns, but something about watching him roll to the rim versus watching Towns do it, it just seems like Capela's... He either gets to the basket faster, he jumps faster, whatever, it just looks a little better with him, okay? I know that's like a brain-dead take, but that's all I got for those two. Of course, guys like Steven Adams and others are in the running, but yeah. Now, one other thing with Capela, is the dude can't shoot, okay? And when you look at that versus like Joel Embiid, Jokic, Horford, DeMarcus Cousins, those guys have the ability to do more on offense than Capela can, right? And I think that would come out a little bit more if he wasn't on a team that had two of the best pick and roll players that we've ever seen, right? So it's, once again, I think you praise him for the things he can do while you also recognize that he's got a great situation for himself. Now, I think one thing that pretty much everyone would agree on with Capela that does knock down his value is how many minutes he can actually give you. The dude has not played 30 minutes a game for an entire season yet. And I know some of that is because the Rockets experimented with weird lineups of like PJ Tucker at center. But even so, I do think that says a little bit to whether it's Capela's stamina or whatever the hell else. And that is a bit of a problem, okay? There is also his free throw shooting. He did manage to get it to the mid-50s. Still not good, but at least he's like approaching respectable, whereas he shot 38% in his second season. I think an interesting question to place on Capela defensively, because again, I do think that's still where he's at his most valuable, is could he transform a defense? Could you put him on an average defensive team and that team becomes like the third best defensive team in the league or something? I don't think so, because I think there's just another level you have to be at to where you can say that about a guy. Like, you have to be Anthony Davis, second half of last season, Rudy Gobert, Joel Embiid, Draymond, and I think Capela, he is still improving. We have to give him that. I mean, I think he could get to that point. I don't think he's there right now, but the dude keeps on getting better, and he's determined to improve. I mean, I give him crap for his minutes, but his minutes have at least gone up every season. His rebounding has improved every year, so we cannot leave out the possibility that he just improves to the point where everybody would consider him to be one of those like 5 or 6 best centers. But I do think, for as valuable of a player as he is, for you to be the kind of player he is and still be considered like among the best fives, then you have to be like just an all-world defensive player. And I think he's a very good one who occasionally looks like a great one, but is not there at this very moment. So, do I think that means he's overrated? No, I don't. I do think he would be a positive addition to any NBA team, but I do think his abilities are maximized by this Houston Rockets team, game plan, philosophy, all that stuff. Another thing I will mention before I'm out of here, for as good of an offensive rebounder as he is, the team shoots 1 million three-pointers, so it gives him more of an opportunity to grab offensive rebounds. So, yeah, he's good. He's a good player. I do not agree with those who will say he is like on the cusp of best fives in the NBA, but he's definitely like, I don't know, number like 8 or something, with potential to keep on improving. So, yeah, Capela's good.